Okay, so the idea of slope. Slope is a ratio of rise over run. So typically when you hear them say rise over run, they are identifying a value of slope. And like I said before, slope is the same thing as that constant rate of change. So we've already done constant rate of change when it came to a graph. We've done constant rate of change when it came to a table. We're going to focus on that constant rate of change or slope now from word problems. We'll practice some more with graphs and tables. We're also going to be focusing on it in a format of points, going from one point to the next without the graph and using what we call slope formula. So just as some quick reminders, the rise in this case, if you wanted to relate it back to that constant rate of change, that's the same thing as the change of your y values. So before, when we were identifying the change of our y, that is called rise. And then the run is that change of your x. Okay, so get that written down. Okay, so when we write our slope, we write it as rise over the run as a fraction. So one of the things that you want to make sure that you keep in mind, slope is mainly presented in fraction form. So that first star bullet, I want you to write that down. That slope is mainly presented in fraction form. Typically, when we talk about the slope, we always have it in a fraction. Now, it's not always going to be fractions. Sometimes they might convert it into a decimal, but I'll tell you right now, it will never be in mixed number form. You don't have mixed number slopes. You have a rise over a run. There is no whole number in the front. It is a rise over run. So get used to the fact that, yes, you can have improper fractions. You can have 4 over 3. Or 7 over 2. Those are perfectly fine and acceptable. If you have a whole number, so if they say the slope is 9, then as a fraction, what would that be? 9 over 1. So the rise would be 9 and the run would be a 1. Okay? And positives and negatives is very important to understand because the idea of a positive slope versus a negative slope means a huge difference. Okay? The second little star point that I want to make sure, slope, when we talk about slope, slope is kind of like GPS. What does GPS do for you guys? When you're trying to find how to get to your friend's place and you open up Google's Maps and then you hit directions, right? That's what slope is. It's a direction. It just acts like a GPS system or a mapping system. So slope is a direction. It tells you how to get from one point to the next. So it's very important that you understand those two things. Slope is usually going to be written as a fraction, a rise value over a run value, and I'll go ahead and highlight rise in our blue, and our run will be in our pink. Notes are right here, honey. Here you go. Okay? So no different than that constant rate of change, that CRC. Change of your y's represents your rise. Change of your x represents your run. You put rise over run. Everybody clear so far? Fantastic. Let's move on. All right. Talking about a couple of simple word problems. When you're given a word problem and you're having to identify the incline or the slope of the value, you need to identify which one of those values would represent the rise and which value would represent the run. Okay, so here, a treadmill. A treadmill is a common concept of slope. Okay, when you increase the level of intensity or the incline level, that is moving your slope upwards or making it more steep. Okay, so a treadmill extends 30 inches in width with an 18-inch incline. What is the slope going to be? So your rise is that incline, how much it's being raised up. So from here down to the ground portion, that's going to represent our 18 inches. Then you've got your width. The width is going to represent the run from this point to the end of your treadmill. That's going to be your 30 inches. So when you are setting this up, again, you set it up as your rise value written over your run value. So we're going to put what on top? What number? 18. And then the 30 goes on the bottom. Now, you cannot leave it as 18 over 30 because you got to simplify. You always need to make sure you simplify it. What are both of these values divisible by? What's the largest factor that can go into both values, Divya? 6. So you can divide both of these values by 6, and that means that we have a slope of 3 over 5. Our slope is going to be 3 over 5. All right, let's take a look at problem number 2. A hiking trail rises 6 feet for every horizontal change of 100 feet. So that's easy. Right off the bat, it's telling us our rise. It just says rise, right? Rise is 6 feet. So the horizontal change of 100 feet, that's going to be our run. So again, we put it as rise over run. So what goes on top? 6. What goes on the bottom? 100. And then you need to simplify it. So we've got 6 over 100. What are they both divisible by? 2. Right? That's the largest factor that can go into both of them. The only factors of 6 are 1, 6, 2, and 3. 100 is only divisible by the 2. So you're going to get 3 over 50 for your slope. Now we're going to pause this video for just a moment because I'm going to have you guys watch something else. So from the video, he mentioned that there are 4 types of slopes. So based off of these graphs represent 4 different kinds of slopes that slope dude just taught us. When we see a line that is going upward from left to right, remember we always read our graphs from left to right. So if I start at the left and move my way to the right, I'm moving upward, which is what kind of slope? Positives. When we move upward, that is a positive slope. So I'm going to go ahead and write that above here. This is a positive slope. Okay? You are moving upward along the graph from left to right. Now, when we move from left to right, if I start at the left and I'm working my way to the right and I'm moving downward, what kind of slope did he say that that was? A negative. Okay. When we came to the flat surface, the flat horizontal surface, what did he call that? 0. This is the 0 slope. And then when we got to the vertical drop was called what? Undefined. These are the 2 that people get confused the most. or mixed up the most. So just make sure you remember 0 slope is a flat surface, means that there is no rise at all. There's absolutely no rise. Undefined is a vertical drop. There's absolutely no run. And I'll show you why it creates that undefined in just a moment. Let's go ahead and move on over to the back. So from the graph, again, we did this yesterday. We kind of identified slopes from graphs, but we just called it, or not yesterday, from the day before, we called it constant rate of change. It's still the same idea. What is important, though, is that you need to identify points on the graph. Okay? So let me ask you this. Do you think, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see it real clearly. When I'm picking a point on the graph, should I pick a point right here? Why not? Well, I mean, it's at 2. Why shouldn't I pick it? I know that the y value is 2, but do I know what the x value is? No. That x value is not at a direct line. So I have no idea what that value is going to be. So when you're picking a point along your line, you need to pick a point that comes through those crosshairs. That's the best way I can describe it, the crosshairs. How many of you have ever played one of those video games that has the shooting games? So in the shooting games, they had like the target thing, right? You had the circle, and then you have a target inside. And if you've got your object right in the center of that target, that's going to be a good shoot, okay? It's the same idea here. These are your targets. You're looking for where they intersect perfectly on the grid, okay? So a point like right here, that would be a good point. This would be a good point to use. This would be a good point to use. Either one of those 3 points would be a good point to use. Now, before I start figuring out what the actual value of slope is, I should probably look at it and at least identify the type. What type of slope is this line? Negative. So at the top, I'm going to go ahead and at least write down that I know that this is a negative slope. So I know at the end, whatever I find for my value, I better make sure I put a negative there. Now, all we have to do is identify the rise and the run. It does not matter which points I pick. It doesn't matter at all. I could pick the first and last point. I could pick the first and middle point. I could pick the middle and last point. It doesn't matter. At the end, it's going to all simplify to the same. So I'm going to show you both ways for this problem. I'm going to start with the first point and go all the way down to the last point. So like I said before, you always start from left and you work your way to the right. So that means in this case we're going down. So I know that I'm going to go decreasing from here to here. This is the level that I'm going to decrease by. What is that a decrease of? A 6, right? If I count it, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that's a decrease of -6. So that means when I'm talking about my rise in this situation, it's a -6. Okay, now for my run, I'm going from where I just stopped to my point. What is that a run of? A run of 4, right? I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's a +4 because, again, I'm moving in the positive direction. I'm moving to the right. When I did the rise, I was moving down, so that made it a negative value. So my run in this case is going to be a +4. A negative over a positive, though, a negative over a positive is just going to come out to a negative. So notice what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my negative in front of my fraction. I don't need to assign it to any of these values. I do not need to assign it to the top or to the bottom. I just put it in the front. And then 6 over 4, both of these values happen to be divisible by 2. And that's going to become 3 over 2. So my slope is a -3 over 2. What this means is that to get from one point to the next, so remember I told you slope is a direction. It's a direction that you like to move. So what this means is that I can either go down 3 and then to the right 2, or I could go the opposite direction. I could go up 3 and then to the left 2. Those are the directions that I could take. That from one point to the next, I could move down 3 spots and to the right 2 spots, and it'll take me to the next point on my graph. Or I could go up 3 spots and then left 2 spots. It'll take me to the next point on my graph. Let me show you. If I start at the middle, if I go down 3, 1, 2, 3, and then to the right 2, 1, 2, it takes me to my next point. Conversely, if I do up 3 to the left 2, start at the middle, up 3, 1, 2, 3, to the left 2, 1, 2, it takes me to my next point. That's what I mean by slope being a direction. So it's important for you to understand those directions, because slope doesn't just go in one direction, it actually goes in both directions along the line. You are going to have to graph equations. So this semester you're going to learn how to actually graph an equation. When you're given an equation that's in slope-intercept form, you'll be given 1 point, and then you'll be given the slope, and you have to graph the next series of points in both directions. So understand how slope works as a direction, okay? Now, like I told you before, again, it doesn't matter which points you pick. So I picked the 2 far out points, but I could have picked the middle point to go to the last point, and it's still going to do the same thing. I would have my run is moving me to the right 1, 2 spots, and my rise is moving downward 1, 2, 3 spots. So I would have a rise of -3 and a run of +2. It does not matter. They all simplify to the same thing, -3/2. Everybody clear? A lot of people like to pick points that are right next to each other, so then it lessens the need of simplifying. I want you to do problem 4 on your own. Just problem 4. All right, so first thing we need to do is identify a couple points on here. So who can tell me one point on this graph? What is one of the points that I can find on this graph? Armando? -3, -3. Yep, that is a single point on the graph. Let's see here. Give me another point. Abakar, give me another point on the graph. 3, 1. Okay, there's another point on the graph. All right, so we just needed to have 2 points. It doesn't matter. You can find more. There's tons of different other points on here that I'm sure that you guys probably went with, but we're going to go with these 2 that were presented to us. Based off of that, again, starting from left to right, looking at the graph, what kind of slope am I dealing with here? Positive. So I'm going to go ahead and write up at the top that I know that this is a positive slope. So I know at the end my answer had better be a positive answer. Okay, finding my rise. So I'm starting here and moving upward. So I'm starting at this -3 and I'm moving up to a +1. What is that rise going to be? 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a +4. So my rise is a +4. My run is starting here at x being -3 and moving all the way to x being a +3. What kind of run value is that? 6, right? So if we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that is a +6. So my run is +6. So we have 4 over 6. Can that be simplified? Yeah, what are they both divisible by? 2. And that becomes 2 over 3, +2 over 3. Okay, so that means that if I go up 2 and then to the right 3, I should find my next point, right? Go up 2, 1, 2, to the right 3, 1, 2, 3. Do I cross to a next point? I do, absolutely. Same thing if I go backwards. I could go down 2, 1, 2, to the left 3, 1, 2, 3. That's going to take me to another point. Okay, so off to the side, I want you guys to understand when we write it as a positive slope, that means that they are both going in a positive direction. A positive 2, so going up 2 to the right 3. Up and right are both positive directions. Or they both would go in a negative direction. Right? Negative over negative would give me a positive. That means I could go down and to the left. Those would be my directions. Down 2 to the left 3. Those are the directions that my slope would take me. Okay, let's take a look at problems 5 and 6. For problems 5 and 6, those are the different kinds of slopes. Okay, what did Slope Dude say that, problem 5 was going to be? Undefined, right? This kind of graph here, this type of line, was an undefined line. I'll just write it right up top. Here's why it's undefined. Your slope is supposed to be a rise over the run. So I'm going to pick any 2 points I want on this graph. I'm going to go ahead and pick the point 8, 4 and 8, 1. I'm going to pick those 2 points as my points. 8, 4 and 8, 1. So for my rise, based off of the 2 points that I just picked, I have a rise of 3. What about my run? There is no run. There is no run. So if there's no run, then that means that that's a 0. When there is no run, that means it's going to be a 0 for your denominator. I want you guys to take your calculators right now, and I want you to put in 3 over 0 as a fraction, and then hit enter. 3 over 0 as a fraction, and hit enter. What do you get? You get a divide by 0 error. When you try to do any number over 0, whenever you try to do 0 at all as your denominator, it doesn't matter. I didn't have to pick 3. I could pick another number. There's an infinite amount of rise possibilities. I could do negative 21. Let's do negative 21 over 0 and enter. I'm still going to get a divide by 0 error because you cannot divide by 0. You are not able to divide by 0, and since we are not able to divide by 0, we call it an undefined value. You are not able to divide by 0 because there is no run. That means our run would be a 0 value. We cannot have a 0 value for our run. That makes it undefined. Now if we look at problem 6 does have a value. Problem 6 has a value. Slope Dude said it was called what? The 0 slope. Here's why. Again, you pick any 2 points on the graph that you want. I'm going to pick negative 6, negative 4. And I'm going to pick positive 2, negative 4. I'm going to pick those 2 points. For my rise, what is my rise? Kenneth? You don't have a rise. We have no rise, so if we have no rise, it's just a 0 for the rise. Based off of the points that I picked, my run, 2, 4, 6, 8. My run is a positive 8. Do 0 over 8 in your calculator. Type 0 over 8 in your calculator, and what does it come out to? 0. When I type 0 over 8, there's 0 over 8, and hit enter, it just comes out to 0. Anytime you have 0 for a numerator over any other number, it'll come out to 0 as your answer. Any questions? All right, let's go on to the last page then. Slope from a table. You guys should be able to do this on your own. Remember, it's rise over run. Your rise is the change in your y values. Your run is going to be the change of your x values. So just keep that in mind. Even when it is a horizontal table, your rise is the change of your y's. Your run is the change of your x. So go ahead and do problem 7 and 8 on your own. Identify the slope from the table. All right, who can tell me for problem 7, what is the rise going to be here? Ray? -3. We are consistently decreasing each time by -3. So our rise in this case is -3. What is our run going to be, Zheng? +2. We are consistently increasing by a +2. So our run is +2. So then as our slope is a -3 over 2. Okay? What about for problem number 8? Who can tell me what is my rise going to be for here? And it's okay if it's not consistent. Yo-chan? +1. And then what happens? +2. And then what happens? +1. Remember I told you guys the other day, it's okay. Your table might not always be consistent as long as the other value is not consistent either. So for our run is going to be what values? Bridget? Good. +4, +8, +4. Okay, so for our rise, when we're checking this, we have 2 values that we need to check. We need to check a +1, and we also need to check a +2. For our runs, that would be a +4 and a +8. They both are the same value. They just simplify out to 1/4. Okay, so there's the slope for the table. Now, slope formula. Sometimes you're not given a graph. Sometimes you're not given a table. Sometimes you're not given a word problem. Sometimes you're just given 2 points. So we've talked about it before when we were doing Pythagorean theorem that you have to find distance between 2 points. That is not the same thing as slope. Distance between 2 points that are working at a diagonal is a measurement or length of the line. It's not the same thing as the incline or the value of diagonal that the line is. Okay, so when we're doing slope formula, you do have your 2 points. You've got your x1 and your y1. That represents the first point. It does not matter which one you choose as your x1, y1, and which one you would choose as your x2, y2, as long as you are consistent with that choice. Because your formula, the order that you subtract matters. It is the rise that is the difference of your y's. So you're going to take your y2 value and you're going to subtract your y1 value. That means you have to subtract your x2 value first and your x1 value last. If I did y1 minus y2, I would have to do x1 minus x2. You cannot just go, okay, I'm going to do y2 minus y1 and then x1 minus x2. You can't flip-flop those because then you're going to get the wrong sign. So let's take a look here at problem number 9. Doesn't matter which one I assign to be which point. I just usually go with the first point being my first. x1, y1 is going to be 1, 2. My x2, y2 is going to be -4, -3. Whenever I set these up, guys, get used to this. Set up your fraction bar first. then put a subtraction sign in the center of both the numerator and denominator. That way you have them previously set up. Because the problem I see all the time is that people forget to put a subtraction sign when there's a negative involved. Subtraction and negative are not the same thing. So you need to make sure that you have that subtraction sign always. So I preset the problem up first, then I put the values in. I'm going to do -3 minus 2, because those are my y's. And then I'm going to do -4 minus the 1 for my x's. Again, because I did -3 minus 2 first, I had to do -4 minus 1. I could not do 1 minus -4. That would give me the wrong sign. All right, now all we have to do is just go about subtracting them. -3 minus 2 gives me a -5. -4 minus 1 gives me a -5. And then a -5 over a -5 comes out to a +1. So there's my slope. My slope is +1. Again, for problem 10, I'm going to set up my fraction. I'm going to put my minus signs already predetermined on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and go about subtracting. I'm going to let this be my x1, y1. This is going to be my x2, y2. So I'm going to subtract -2 minus -4. I'm going to do -3 minus -7. -2 minus -4 is going to come out to a +2. -3 minus -7 comes out to a +4. And 2 over 4 simplifies to 1/2. And there's my slope. Your homework for tonight, you have Delta Math. You've got 10 problems that are going to be focusing on you identifying slope from a graph. You have 10 problems of you finding slope using just the points. And then 10 problems focusing on parallel and perpendicular lines, so 0 and undefined slopes. It's all in Delta Math.